When a major film star goes missing, a stuntman is sent to find him. However, he gets caught in a conspiracy that puts him in more danger than any stunt he's ever performed. Welcome back to Movies Explained. Today's film is a 2024 action comedy titled The Fall Guy. The movie begins with a stuntman named Colt Seavers discussing the crucial role that stunt people have played in movies and TV over the years. Colt often gets injured while performing stunts, but he doesn't really mind because he's in love with Jody Marino, a camera operator aspiring to become a director. Later, Tom, an action star for whom Colt is stunt doubling, requests to see him because he and his producer, Gail, believe Colt revealed too much of his face during the stunt. Tom asks Colt to repeat the stunt again without showing his face. Meanwhile, Jody asks Colt out for a drink, but he proposes a beach date instead. As Colt prepares to redo the stunt, something goes wrong, causing him to fall to the ground and be taken away on a stretcher by paramedics. Back at home, still recovering from his injury, Colt has given up his job as a stuntman. Gail, a film producer, calls and asks if he's working as a valet at a restaurant. While at his job, he is recognized by someone he formerly worked with. The guy refers to him as the Fall Guy and arrogantly tells Colt to park his car, forcing Colt to drive around while the guy begs him to stop. Colt informs Gail that he is now retired and that he is to blame for the accident. Gail urges him to visit Sydney because she needs his help. Colt initially declines, but after finding out that Gail is the director, he gladly agrees. Dan, the stunt coordinator, wants to meet Colt after he's been 3D scanned so that Tom's face can be superimposed on top of his. Dan takes him to the set and explains the stunt. Colt is anxious about the stunt since he wants to avoid another mishap. Dan uses a Rocky quote to encourage him. While Jody is discussing a prop with a prop handler, another set worker recommends employing visual effects rather than fireworks. Without Jody giving a signal, the pyrotechnics suddenly go off in the distance. After Nigel yells at the technicians, Jody requests that he have a polite conversation with them. On the other hand, Venti tells Jody that the printer has stopped working, making it difficult for the third act to continue. Jody asks everyone to pay attention to her and do as she says. Colt assesses the consistency of the sand as he gets to the scene and asks Dan to reschedule the stunt. Dan attempts to motivate him, but Colt says he's jinxing him. Jody steps in and requests that Dan carry out the stunt. Colt agrees to perform the stunt after Dan tells him how important this movie is to Jody. Colt puts on the helmet and gives the go-ahead for the stunt, nervous but determined. He expresses concern to Dan about the lack of traction and the possibility of running into the camera, but Jody pushes him to come closer. In the end, Colt's vehicle smashes into the camera. There are 7 more cameras, so Dan pushes him to keep going. Colt successfully completes the stunt and comes out unscathed. Jody is surprised to discover that the stuntman is Colt. She takes him aside to talk. Colt reveals that it was Gail's idea for him to perform the stunt and expresses his happiness at seeing her as a director. Jody tells Dan to get a different stuntman, but he says there's no one else. After the next stunt scene, Jody offers to explain the story to Colt if he hasn't read the script. She says it's about a space cowboy and an alien named Aliana who fall in love. But the cowboy gets hurt and suddenly disappears. Colt understands and continues with his stunt. After finishing the stunt, Jody tells Colt that Aliana was heartbroken and thought the space cowboy lied to her. So she moved on and started dating other humans. Jody then tells Colt to do the stunt again. She asks what the space cowboy would say about disappearing, but Colt asks to talk about it in private, which Jody refuses. Colt says the cowboy would admit he regrets it and fears he waited too long and that Aliana has moved on. Colt asks for another chance, but Jody insists he does the stunt again. Later, Colt meets Gail, who congratulates him on his stunt. Colt confronts her about lying that Jody wanted him there, and Gail reveals that Tom is missing. She explains she can't call the police because the studio would cancel the movie. Gail begs Colt to find Tom, saying that if Tom isn't found, it will be Jody's first and last movie. She gives Colt the code to Tom's loft and tells him he has 2 days to bring Tom back and save Jody's film. Colt gets into a car and starts thinking about Jody while crying. Jody knocks on the window and asks why he's crying, and he says it's because of jet lag. Jody apologizes for asking him to do the stunt so many times. She gets in the car and asks how he's been, and he just gives a thumbs up, which annoys her. She admits it was wrong to try to force a relationship when it was just a fling. Colt says he wanted to apologize but didn't know how. Jody suggests that if he wants to stay, they need to keep things professional, and Colt agrees. Colt then goes to Tom's loft and turns on the lights. Suddenly, a woman attacks him with a sword, and Colt tries to defend himself. He recognizes her face, and she introduces herself as Iggy, Tom's girlfriend and the lead actress in Jody's movie. She attacks again, but he disarms her and realizes the sword is just a prop. He asks where to find Tom, and she suggests checking a club he often goes to. Iggy also tells him to meet a drug dealer named Dune and pretend to be Tom at the club. Dune invites Colt to sit down, and Colt tells him he's a stuntman. Dune shows respect and asks if there's an Oscar for stuntmen, and Colt says no. Colt takes a sip of his drink and starts hallucinating. Some thugs try to kidnap him, but Colt fights them off. Dune tries to run away, but Colt chases after him. Dune gets into a taxi, and to stop him, Colt stands in front of it and gets hit. Colt demands to know where Tom is, and Dune admits he drugged Colt on the orders of Tom's head of security. Dune tells Colt that he usually delivers drugs to them at the Pendleton Hotel, and instructs Colt to meet a man named Kevin, who will provide him with the room keys. When Colt asks about the duration of the drug effects, Dune responds that they will last until Colt stops seeing unicorns. Colt heads to the hotel to meet Kevin, but encounters Jody instead. Upon seeing his bleeding face, she asks what happened, to which he falsely claims to have gone for a run. Jody confesses that the studio is pressuring her to change the story to have a happy ending. Their conversation is interrupted by Gail, who takes Jody away. Kevin eventually arrives and hands Colt a room key card. Colt attempts to open the door using the key card, but it doesn't work. Kevin provides another key card, which also fails to open the door. Frustrated, Colt decides to break in. Shortly after, Jody calls him, and they discuss her ideas for the movie. Following their conversation, Colt discovers a body in the bathtub. He calls Gail, informing her about everything from Iggy to Dune, and says he's going to go to the police. Gail tells him she'll handle it. Suddenly, a cop knocks on Colt's car window. Colt takes the cop to the room, but the body is gone. The next day, Colt tells Dan that he plans to tell Jody about the dead body, but Dan suggests it might have been a hallucination since Colt was high. Dan also tells Colt that Jody made major changes to the stunt scenes after their talk the previous night. Colt pulls Jody aside to talk, and she says she wants to film the entire sequence with him, then add Tom's face over his in post-production. Colt agrees. They start filming, and Colt does the whole sequence very well. After the shoot, Jody invites Colt for karaoke, and he accepts. Gail arrives and gives Colt a plane ticket to go home, explaining that something serious is about to happen, and she doesn't want him involved. Jody waits for Colt at the bar while Colt meets Alma, Gail's assistant, and starts chatting with her. Alma tells him that the last time she saw Tom was at a party, and the next day Gail called because Tom had lost his phone, which Alma found. She says the phone has information that could seriously affect someone's career. Alma offers to give him the phone in exchange for a producer's credit in Jody's movie. Suddenly, two people tase Colt and Alma, kidnapping her. Colt gets into a car with Jean-Claude, one of Alma's dogs, and pursues the kidnappers. Meanwhile, Gail meets Jody at the bar and tells her she gave Colt a ticket to go home. Jody is unhappy because she needs Colt to finish her movie. Gail explains she thought Jody wanted Colt gone. Colt ends up crashing his car into a truck. He tells Jean-Claude to attack one of the men while he jumps onto the truck and starts fighting another guy. Alma joins in, fighting the driver. As Colt passes by the bar where Jody is singing, a car comes towards him. He jumps and grabs onto a bar, then leaps back onto the truck. Alma kicks the guy off the truck and takes control of the steering wheel. She abruptly applies the brake, throwing Colt through the windshield and onto the road. Colt goes to the bar, but Dan tells him Jody has already left. Colt explains everything to Dan, who suggests he get help from Venti, a tech genius. Venti tells Colt it will take a few days to unlock the phone. Colt and Dan then go to Tom's loft to find the passcode. Dan finds the code, and Colt unlocks the phone. They watch a video where Tom is wrestling his stunt double, who Colt recognizes as the dead body he saw at the hotel. In the video, Tom accidentally kills the stunt double. Venti calls Dan, telling him to turn on the news. The report says the police have found the stunt double's dead body, and Colt is the main suspect. Colt sends messages to Jody, but she doesn't see them. A group of armed men approaches the loft, and Dan helps Colt fight them off. During the fight, Jean-Claude attacks one of the men, giving Colt a chance to aim his gun at him, while Dan takes the shotgun from the man. Dan goes outside to check for more attackers, and the last assailant grabs the gun from Colt and shoots him. The attacker calls someone, saying Colt is dead, not realizing the bullets were blanks. Colt escapes, jumps onto a boat, and runs into Tom before getting knocked out. At the same time, Gail meets with Jody and tells her that Colt is suspected of murder. Jody couldn't believe Colt would do something like that, remembering a time when it took him 23 minutes just to get a cockroach out of her room. Gail also tells Jody that Colt didn't make it to the airport. Colt wakes up, tied to a chair, as Tom demands his phone, but Colt refuses. Tom confesses to tampering with the stunt equipment, causing the accident, because he felt Colt was overshadowing him. He reveals that Gail orchestrated the plan to frame Colt for the stunt double's death. Jody tries to read Colt's messages, but Gail accidentally drops her phone into her drink. Tom informs Colt about Gail's scheme and demands his phone once more. Colt explains that one of his assailants shot the phone, which pleases Tom. Tom orders his men to kill Colt, and they begin pouring gasoline on him. However, Colt outwits them and escapes on a boat. The bad guys pursue him, shooting as he reaches a dock, where he cuts off the rope and hides. He calls Jody and tells her that after the accident, he felt like he failed and thought she deserved someone better, so he vanished. He says avoiding her hurt more than any stunt he did, and admits he still loves her, urging her not to give up on a happy ending. The bad guys start shooting at him, so Colt hangs up. He crashes into a gas tank, and his boat explodes. Jody tries to call back, but the bad guy informs Gail that Colt is dead, and Gail relays the news to Jody. Dan attempts to message Colt, but the message doesn't go through. Reporters arrive, announcing Colt's death, and showing a video with his face superimposed on Tom's. However, Colt is actually alive and has safely swum to the dock. Tom's men arrive at the set and search for Dan, who is hiding among the extras in disguise. Meanwhile, Jody is in her trailer when someone in a costume approaches her from behind. Startled, she attacks, but it turns out to be Colt. He reveals everything about Tom and Gail to her. They share a kiss, but their moment is interrupted by Gail knocking on the door. Jody hides Colt and lets Gail in. Gail claims she tried to help Colt, but it didn't work out. She informs Jody that Tom has returned, and since Colt is gone, they plan to use special effects for the stunts. Gail suggests Jody take a break, but Jody insists on finishing the movie herself. After Gail leaves, Colt and Jody come up with a plan to make Tom confess. The shooting starts with Tom giving a big speech. He meets Jody, who explains that despite the use of special effects, he still needs to be in a car so they can film his face. Tom arrives on set, and they handcuff him for the scene, while a worker attaches a microphone to his outfit. He gets into the car and they start filming. Suddenly, Colt, disguised with a mask, jumps into the car and drives off with Tom as Tom's men chase after them. Dan blocks the road with explosions to stop the pursuit. Colt frightens Tom by suggesting they attempt a dangerous jump, making it look like a murder-suicide if it goes wrong. Scared, Tom confesses to everything he and Gail did, admitting they framed Colt because they didn't want the movie to fail. His confession is caught on the microphone hidden in his outfit. Colt successfully completes the risky 250-foot jump without getting hurt. Meanwhile, Gail instructs Tom's men to help her reach the helicopter. She threatens and steals the confession recording from the sound operator. Jody tries to stop Gail by hitting her, but one of Gail's men grabs Jody from behind. Jody fights them off with a prop, assisted by Jean-Claude. Tom escapes and boards the helicopter with Gail. Dan and other stuntmen engage in a brawl with Tom's thugs. Dan subdues the main antagonist and secures him with a cable, leaving him suspended in the air. Colt jumps and climbs onto the camera arm of a car, using it to propel himself onto the helicopter. Colt fights Tom and Gail, who attempt to shoot him to retrieve the confession recording. Dan and others set up an airbed on the ground using a car, allowing Colt to land safely. Colt manages to grab the recording. Gail urges Tom to shoot Colt, but Tom refuses, saying he's one of the best stuntmen. Gail then grabs the gun from Tom and tries to shoot Colt herself, but her gun is empty. The movie concludes as Colt flips them off, jumps from the helicopter, and lands safely on the airbed. Jody rushes to Colt, admiring his heroic act, and kisses him. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more videos.